Enrolling in the Academy is really simple. You'll just go to our website, wblinc.org/academy. And when you get here, you'll see our main page and you can click enroll and it'll take you to this form where you're just going to fill this out. It'll take you about 5 minutes. Once you submit this, you're enrolled in the Academy and you'll receive an email from me so you can pick the classes you'd like to take and join our Academy family. So we're an after-school program rooted in hip-hop. So we have a bunch of classes that you may find interesting. You can go right to our website and go to our classes tab and you'll see some of them, from performing arts like hip-hop theater, spoken word, hip-hop dance, some of our business classes that are like a boss and walk it like I talk it, which would be more arts management and entrepreneur based. And then we also have things like our music classes, emceeing and rapping and beat production and DJing. You can go to wblinc.org/academy to enroll.
What's going on, world? It's yours truly, Mazi Mutafa, back for another installment of the Alternative Winter Break 2021. I'm super excited to introduce our guest for today. Matt from 1222 is going to be here to talk a little bit about his own journey in the world of social media and marketing. What's going on, Matt?
Hello, how's it going? Thank you for having me.
No doubt. You come highly recommended because of the work of your company. And so I'd love to have this conversation with you for young people who are interested in careers in social media or marketing or storytelling, even more broadly. Because one of the things, at least as a small nonprofit, I know that we've hired tons of younger people, i.e. college students, who have degrees of expertise in social media to come and work for us. Over the years, we've gotten better at having our own upper management to be able to manage them. So their internships have really been about learning. So I'm really excited to learn about your company. But before we get to that, I want to start this interview off the same way I start all of them off, asking about your family and specifically how deep your knowledge of your family is. The real specific question is, who is the oldest ancestor you are aware of? And what's his or her name, if you know?
So thank you for that question. I will start by saying that I'm an immigrant. I came to the United States in 1980, a long time ago. And I was just a little kid back then. And so, family is a huge part of who I am. I'm just wired in that way. And so just the other day, I was putting together a Zoom for all of our 16 cousins on my dad's side. And we all, we see each other here and there, but this was the first time in a long time that we got together, at least virtually. And now, as almost some of us are, in their 40s, some of us are still in their 20s, and so as a adult group, for us to kind of interact and actually engage in something other than pass the turkey or at family reunions and things of that sort. So that's really cool. And again, I always tend to kind of bring people together in that way. But I say that because I actually don't have a long history or long knowledge of my history because just due to I don't want to say it's because of being an immigrant family, but beyond my grandparents, I don't know much. And I know that part of it is also because a lot of our families got separated during the Korean War. And, there's if you can only imagine in real life, half of your family decided, let's go, let's migrate to the South. It's safer there. And half of them said, we're not going anywhere. We're sticking it out here. This is our lives. You can imagine how families get split that way, and which is a very common story. So I don't know anyone beyond my grandparents. Even stories I don't know beyond my grandparents. But other than I do know some stories about, again, just going through the Korean War and the sacrifices they had to make. I have spent a lot of time trying to retrace a little bit beyond, at least myself, wanting to know my father and my mother's, what were their dreams and aspirations when they were younger, and how was their parents in terms of being a good mother and father to my parents, right? And so I know a little bit about that, but yeah, it's unfortunate. You asked that question and it pains me now that I've even been answering it. But yeah, there's a little bit of a gap there.
So to be honest, most people who I've talked to, their story is the same. And so even, do you know your grandparent? Do you remember your grandparents' names?
Yeah. Yeah. So
Tell me about them. Maybe what did they do?
So on my mother's side, my grandmother, her name was Kyung Ha Kim, and she was a school teacher, just like my mother, and I was a school teacher for a little bit as well. So, you know, I guess you could say that, you know, oh, teaching runs in the family, but I don't really think, at least for me, that's not why I went into teaching, because, you know, I never knew my mother as a teacher. I only knew her after she left teaching to come to America, and then, you know, like a lot of Asian families, they owned a convenience store and you know, made a living that way. But so that's kind of interesting to think that, you know, my grandmother was a teacher, my mother was a teacher, and I was a teacher for a little bit. My grandfather was very studious, even to his final days. He was very into learning languages and studying, and often he would be trying to learn English. Once he came to America to kind of live with us, he was trying to learn English, and he'd always call me over to kind of say, "Hey, what does this mean?" And I would try to explain to him as a, you know, as a fourth grader, and I do remember being very impatient with him because he would learn things in a very academic way, and so he would use words in a way that I wouldn't hear in everyday language, and I would say, "Oh, no, that's wrong. You can't say that." And then he would pull up an American dictionary, and he would say, "No, but look, it says it right here." I'm like, well, that's just, you know, like that's like the very academic. But he was very much by the books, and so he was always studying until the very end. And so that was my grandfather. And then on my father's side, they were my grandfather was a pastor or a minister in Korea. And my grandmother, I assume, was a stay-at-home mom in Korea, because on my dad's side, my mom only had one brother, but my dad has like 5, 6 siblings among him. And so they had I'm sure she was a stay-at-home mom. And but he, unfortunately, my grandfather on my dad's side, he passed away when he was really, really young, even before my mother knew him, even before my father got married. So another reason why maybe some of our stories are missing. But again, it's a great question, because this past year, my father passed away, and it was weird because he passed away, and then all of a sudden, just this flood of stories came in, just from people just talking, you know, aunts and uncles together, and then they would, you know, it's probably a natural response to some closing of a chapter that you kind of reflect back. And so I started learning some stories about my father that I just never knew. And it's not like anything was surprising, because it all fits within the kind of the persona that I have of him, but it's just elements that I just did not know exist. And what's interesting is that he was a lot like myself, more than I ever thought, because I always thought me and my dad were polar opposites, and we were you know, we had a tough relationship growing up. Not a tough relationship, but just, you know, it wasn't a, you know, hey son, let's go throw the football around, or let's go fly the kite. And so, but I learned that he was in many ways a lot like myself. Yeah, and my dad was, he worked as just kind of, I believe he worked as like a company man, a typical company man in Korea, I think an electric company. And then again, once he moved to America, you know, my mom and my dad they ran a convenience store for the rest of their working lives. And my mother's still around. She's still around. She's in Philadelphia.
Well, I definitely appreciate you sharing this story. My condolences for the loss of your father, and gratitude for your ability to be there to hear those stories about the similarities between the two of you. I wonder, when you think back, most of this alternative winter break is talking to people who are varying degrees of creatives. So I've talked to like radio production managers, I've talked to podcasters, to bloggers, to all kinds of different people, right? And so you are working in a creative space that also merges technology in a different way. But I wonder, do you have memories of being creative? Like, what's your earliest creative memory?
Yeah, I've always been into kind of the creative arts. In fact, that's originally what I really wanted to grow up and be. You know, I wanted to be something in the creative arts specifically. You know, that was often very, you know, discouraged in that, you know, it was like my parent, you know, like we didn't come to America so that you can be an artist, you know? And so, while they you know fostered it, they didn't really encourage it as a profession, you know. But early on, I remember, as you know, as early as first grade, doing things where I'm always bringing things to my parents, like, look what I did, look what I did, and you know, and I would see that they would be impressed. But yeah, it just never went into like, wow, he could really do something with this. Probably the earliest memory that I have in terms of something that I created and I felt like almost like proud of it, like I wanted to show it. And in fact, other people would see it and like my peers, my friends, again, this is probably like first or second grade, and they wanted to do it as well. Like they would copy what I was doing. Was that I would take some of my favorite movies at the time. It was like Back to the Future, for example. And I would basically interview the star, Michael J. Fox, and I would just like look for his answers in the script. So basically I would pull out pieces of the script, whether he has a one-line zinger or he's just saying, you know, yes, definitely. I would pull those out, and then I would all of a sudden create an interview, and then play the VHS tape and have him respond, and then record that part and then stop, and then I have to cue up to the next stop. And so then all of a sudden it sounds like I'm interviewing Michael J. Fox, and I would play with my friends and they would just all crack up, and then all of a sudden they would do the same thing. You know, they would have their own version of it, and they would be interviewing, you know, Freddy Krueger or something like that. So that's probably the first time I felt like I created something that even I myself was a little bit like, wow, like this is kind of cool.
It feels like that scene in Home Alone where the robbers are outside and he's using the video to respond to what it is that they're saying. Totally ingenious. I almost wish I had been one of those friends to be there, because if you were doing that in the first and second grade, I wonder. So like you said, your parents were like, you know, we didn't bring you to America to become an artist. What were the kinds of things they were encouraging you to do academically?
Just because I showed an aptitude for math and school and things of that sort. I mean, the expectation was that I was going to be a doctor. I mean, it was just like, you know, it's one of the things that just translates across, you know, across ethnicity and culture and whatnot. And so for the longest time, even just because, again, I was like the kid that always would get the straight A's, even my teachers would call me Dr. Chun, because it was just all about, I'm going to grow up to be a doctor. And so it was like Dr. Chun. And I even had a male school teacher who I really looked up to. You know, even back then there wasn't really a lot of male school teachers, and he was a doctor, you know, a PhD doctor. And so again, I just really wore that with a badge of honor. So I really kind of identified with that and really wanted to be a doctor. Yeah, so that's definitely what was the thinking, that I was going to be a doctor, if not a doctor, something very, very like high level professional in that way. The moment I got into college, after doing that rat race of trying to, you know, get the good scores on tests and trying to get into this good school, once I got to college, I immediately saw that there were, actually I noticed this in high school too, but I noticed that there were a lot of people who were, I mean, just way smarter than I was. I mean, just brilliant. And I was just floored. I was like, wow, I did not know that you could be like that much smarter than what I understood of being smart. And so that really took, in many ways, that really took the pressure off me, because I was like, okay, so, you know, being smart is not really my super strength, you know? And so in many ways, that kind of pivoted me early in college to say, okay, I'm going to go for something that's a little bit more like you ask the questions, who am I? What am I about? And at the time, I did recognize that I have a passion for the arts or for being creative, and teaching was the best hybrid. It was something that was highly respected in Korea. Teachers are highly respected because education is just highly respected. In fact, that when you meet a stranger in Korea, and you sometimes you address them as teacher because you assume that you give them the best title possible. So you call them teacher, even though they're not your teacher. You don't even know if they teach, right? But so that was something that my parents could get behind, especially in their mind. They're like, oh, our son is really smart. And so, oh, he's going to be a teacher. Okay, that makes sense. And that allowed me to also still be somewhat creative in that, there's a lot of creativity that's involved when you're trying to educate and trying to come up with different ways of communicating, whether it be history, math, science. And so that's why I went into teaching. But yeah, the original thought was that for me to be a doctor.
Matt, can we back up though? Because this idea that when you were in high school, maybe even middle school, this idea that you were standing out academically, which led teachers to kind of speak a specific career into your life. I'm curious, what other than getting good grades, were you actually doing anything? Were you playing any sports, involved in any student clubs or anything? Were there other interests other than just being great academically that people could see in you?
No, I mean, there were other things, but it wasn't academic. That's the thing. I played instruments growing up. I was really into music. I continued to draw and do art, all throughout high school. I mean, in high school, anytime you choose an elective, I always chose art 1, art 2, art 3. At one point, I even tried to apply. Sometimes you would see things on TV or you would see things in the magazine advertisement where it's like a drawing contest. Although thinking back at it now, it's like, okay, it was more of just, a sweepstake type of thing. But it's like, yes, I can draw that. I can draw that and submit this and maybe I can win this. And so any kind of energy that I had, I also was very much involved with the church. And so, which also involved a lot of creativity as well, because I ended up becoming kind of like the captain of our youth group type of thing. And so, we would also produce like magazines, like basically Xerox print out magazines, and it would just be like everyone in the youth group would write a little article, then we would put clip art on it, and then we make photocopies, and then we would pass it out. So, there was a lot of avenues for me to kind of continue to grow in terms of a creative and content aspect. And so that's where I spent my energies on. And so it wasn't academic. It wasn't like I was studying after school or in fact, I hardly ever studied, which is, again, when I realized, wow, there are people who are really smart and really study and they really get into this thing. So most of my time was spent on just all the creative arts. And it's video games. I was very much into video games. Playing Legos. I had a huge Lego set and people would come over and we would just, we would divvy up the Lego pieces. And, when we're talking about Legos, like these days, it's like people buy Lego sets and, it's like you're building something and then you're like, oh, don't touch it. We built it. It's the Death Star. Whereas for me back then, it was really much about like, oh, you bought a new set, create it, but then you break it apart. And now you have this like treasure trove of all these pieces that you can create with different capabilities now. And so we would split that up and we'd all create our own spaceships and things of that sort. And then people are like, don't break my spaceship. I'm going to come back tomorrow. And so, I had a lot of creative outlets. I would also like play a lot with action figures. And my sister used to even just sit there and watch me play and carry out the stories because it was like watching a cartoon. And so, I played a lot. And it wasn't like playing as in like, oh, I didn't study, I played, but it was playing as in I was really, I guess, because I knew, I guess I was just trying to enrich myself. I was just basically following my passion at that point. And it was just a very separate thing from the idea of like, what am I studying on and who am I going to become in the future? That was like a very different thing. I thought about that, but I was also very drawn into playing and the creative things. And it never dawned on me, or it never came together for me at a younger age. This all came together as I got older. But when I was younger, it was always understood that those are two separate paths that can coexist, but they're not one and the same.
Got you. So as you're having all these experiences in school that are positive and out of school that are positive, how do you go about making the decision about college, where you're going to go and what it is you're going to study? Do you know from the very beginning that teaching is the route, or is it that something happens in college?
Yeah, that was difficult, and I feel so bad when I think about how it's structured these days and what the youth have to think about, because they really kind of push you to make a decision, right? It's like, yeah, you have to pick the right college. Then once you go to college, you have like 1 year to kind of think, find yourself, and then it's what's your major? What major are you going to get into? So there's a lot of pressure on young people very early on to say, even as a kid, what are you going to become when you grow up? And so, again, because I always knew that I had to have this professional, we have to make it. You have to get a respectable job. You have to make money. So at every moment where I had to make some of those decisions, it was difficult thinking back, because I wasn't really following my gut. It was more about what is going to be the most advantageous or most appropriate, or if anything, the most approved by my parents. My parents were very hands-off, which is, a lot of Asian families can be really, really micromanaging, like everything about their academics and their career and whatnot. But my parents were thankfully very hands-off. But I knew that they had high expectations for me, and I knew that I had high expectations for myself. And so it was about, oh, what did you get on your SAT scores, and oh, you need this much SAT to go to that school, and there's a lot of comparing, especially with other Korean friends, because the parents would talk at church and say, oh, my son got this on his SAT score, now he's going to this college. So there was that kind of keeping up with the Joneses aspect of it. And that's what drove all my decisions early on. And again, it was really once I got to college when I immediately recognized, again, I was like, I'm not going to be a doctor. I'm not the kind of person that really is going to just put my head down in a book and study it to the nth degree and become an expert at the medical field. I just knew that I wouldn't do that. And so that's when I immediately pivoted to teaching, which was a very happy medium. But prior to that, just figuring that out, if I could go back and give myself some assurances, although I would probably be like, who are you and why are you talking to me? But I really wished for myself and for just any youth to really know that they really owe it to themselves to have that space to kind of figure out what is it that makes them tick, and what is it that they want, and what is it that's going to give them that intrinsic motivation and drive to go after something. And a lot of times you don't know, especially if you haven't been exposed to a lot of things. I didn't know about all these careers, and I only knew doctor, lawyer. I only knew the things that my parents could say in English. And so I think about just the pressure that I put on myself then, and even like my younger sister has kids now, and they're about in high school age, and there's so much pressure about what high school are you going to and what courses are you going to take. And I also know that just from hiring interns over the last 10, 15 years, that there's also like back then internship was like, wow, you're really going for it, you're really interested in that. But now it's like you have to have an internship, otherwise you're behind anyone else to kind of be marketable and employable. And so it's just a shame that that's so much pressure when, some people probably know right away where they want to go, but I would guess that for a lot of people, you really need to find yourself. You really need to kind of grow into yourself. And the way that things are now, or just the way that our systems are, it may have changed a little bit, and hopefully people are recognizing it. But I just feel like, I hope that there is enough space for people to make those kind of explorations.
Matt, where did you wind up going to school, and what did you major in?
So I went to UVA here in right outside DC, not right outside DC, but it's DC adjacent, I guess. And I, again, even that, I studied, well, I was a psychology major because, again, that's thinking about it now, of course I would do that, but it was something that I immediately saw that I was interested in. And then when it came time to kind of figuring out what your major is, you know, UVA has a great education program for teachers. And it's actually it's a 5-year program. So you get your master's in 5 years at the same time with your undergrad. And so for me, in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, teaching is something that I can see myself, and it is a respectable career. And I could do it in 5 years. I can get my master's, because there's also the expectation that, oh, you're so smart, you're going to probably end up getting, you know, additional degrees. And here I am, I get a head start, you know. So in many ways, that's kind of why I went into it. I was like, I'll do it. And I remember even being a little bit like, do I really want to do it? Or at least just being nervous, like, wow, this is like, I'm like committing now to like even being at the school for another year then after all my classmates graduate. But then I was like, oh no, but you know, this is what you got to do when you grow up. You know, you have to have some sort of path. And so this is going to give me that leg up. And so, so I did it. So yeah, I got my bachelor's in psychology, and then I got my master's in education. And yeah, and then I was a school teacher for 2 years after that.
Out of curiosity, what was it about psychology that was appealing to you? Learning about the human mind and evolution and all that. What was it about that was appealing?
I think just as a person who is generally more introspective and creative and sensitive, you know, I had a natural instinct for knowing that there's a lot of things that are subtext and reading between the lines and nuances. And so that world was very familiar to me, you know, like I knew that people can say something, but really they meant something else because there's something else going on, or I see the connection. And so once I was exposed to the study of that, whether it's based on social cues and societal cues, or based on the way that the mind thinks about how to, you know, when you see a bird, how does your mind know that that's a bird? Because, you know, like someone, you know, you can draw an imaginary bird, have no resemblance to any real species, but people will look at that and say, oh, that's some kind of bird. Well, so how does our mind figure that out? And then there's all these theories about like, you know, like Freud and Jung, which is thinking about like how, you know, the experience of growing up with your parents and the way that your parents raised you, that all plays into the kind of person that you are. So all of that stuff was fascinating to me because it was things that I already was thinking about. Now I have like other brilliant people who have theories about it and constructs and language for it that really kind of solidified it for me, right? And I remember that even I was in class, I was in social psych with 2 of my close girlfriends, and we would be studying it, and I would be like, basically you know, we would come across the topic, and I would kind of say, like, this is, you know, I would give analogies. Again, like even back then, I was already trying to communicate, you know, I was giving analogies so that they would understand, like, oh, I see what they're doing. Or I would say, remember last time when, you know, Jennifer, she came over and she got mad at this. That's what this is about. And they're like, oh, I get it. And the funny thing is that first test, they got higher grades than I did, and they were laughing at me. And again, what happened was I overthought every single question, because I'm like, yeah, but this, you know, there's another way you can think about this question. And what is this, you know, the teacher that, you know, what is he really trying to assess here? Maybe, you know, so I would like overthink it. And so I actually ended up getting a lower grade than they did on that first test. And they just thought that was funny. Eventually, you know, my good grades continued, and I did get a higher grade than they did. But on that first test, they did get higher grades. And so that was funny.
Were you involved in student life at all at UVA in terms of like, I'm not sure if there was, like, I went to the University of Maryland. And so I remember I was the president of the Black Student Union, and we did a bunch of work with the Asian American Student Union and various other groups. And so I just wondered, were you involved at all in student life at UVA?
I was, but I was a little bit sheltered. which is, I guess, a little bit of a running theme in the way that I grew up, because there were a lot of Koreans. You know, the Korean community were very. We all came here at the same time. Like some Koreans, my peers may have been born here. Some were born in Korea and immigrated like I did, but none of our parents were born here. You know, all of our parents are immigrants for sure. And so we're a younger race, so we all have very similar upbringings. And so when I went to UVA, there were a lot of Koreans in the exact same exact life, same exact parent situation, parent pressures, church. And so, you know, I got really involved with that community, you know, so it was like a Christian-based youth association, mostly Koreans, but it wasn't solely Koreans, but it was mostly Koreans. And so I had a very rich social life in college. You know, that's really when I came into my own, but it was still limited. Like I could look back and think, wow, I didn't do any of that in college. You know, when people say UVA, oh, football games and this and that. And the thing is, I didn't do any of that, which is, again, it's very similar to how it was in high school. In high school, there was a bunch of us and we just kind of stayed together, and we didn't really participate in the school rallies or the prom. So it was the same way in college too. And so, but the thing is, in college though, again, there's always this duality thing with me, I guess. In college, while I was doing that and being sheltered, I guess I did feel the need to force myself out, and because in college I was involved with, I joined the AV club, which was the you know, that's when I really started getting into video and editing, because, you know, back then it was all about camcorders, so it wasn't as digital as it is today. And then I was also involved with the drama club, and I even took an internship. I had to convince my professors that even though I was an education major, that I really wanted to do an internship at a music record label in Nashville, and that would count as my like internship like credit. And my argument was that, you know, as a teacher, you want to be very diverse, and you want to have things to pull from to kind of really come up with creative ways to communicate. You know, you can't be a one-note teacher. You know, those are the worst, right? And so they approved, and so I got to do that. And so I was always forcing myself out, not forcing myself out, because the forcing part was more on the academic side, like, okay, I got to do that for this reason. But I just couldn't help contain the things that I was interested in. And so in many ways, I guess I would say my true self, or at least the core of who I am, really just kind of felt the need to continue to express itself, you know? And so even after 2 years of teaching, which I loved teaching. It was like one of the best experiences of my life. But I did leave teaching then to go ahead and pursue the music business, because I moved to New York and kind of left it all behind, and felt a little guilty about that for sure, because, you know, it's like I went to school and got a degree, and now I'm in New York trying to like get a temp job, and, you know, and I would get interviews like, do you know how to type? Do you know how to do math? And I was like, yeah, I was a math teacher. But, you know, it was a little bit like humbling. It was humbling. It was very, but I knew that I had to start from the bottom, and I had to kind of work my way into the music industry, because they didn't care. They didn't care that I had a degree, and that I you know, I did everything that I did. I was just basically someone else competing for a job that many people, you know. One thing you'll know about entertainment specifically on that creative side is that there's a lot of competition. So there's kind of not hazing, but it's like, it's almost like they make it tough in the beginning to kind of get your foot in the door, and you're an assistant. Sometimes you watch these movies where like the assistants have to do crazy things, and part of that is probably just weeding out the people that can't take it, or it's just that those executives, well, when they were starting out, they had to get coffee for all the people in the team, and so now it's, you know, passing the torch on to someone new.
So you've actually created the great segue, because I was going to ask. So okay, so you've got your master's. You teach math for 2 years. Great experience. Next step is to move into the music industry. How old are you at this point?
I was 25.
So 25. You pick up. Where were you living?
I moved to New York. I was teaching in Northern Virginia, and I was living in Virginia, in Fairfax. And then after 2 years, I moved to New York.
And so you're in New York, you're at this record label. How long are you there? What are the skills you feel like you pick up? Because all of this, the way that I frame these conversations is that all these experiences bring you to, for in your case, 1222. So like, what are the things you learn other than this truly hazing process that is a part of most industries to figure out who's really committed and who's really just kind of 1 foot in and 1 foot out. So what do you learn through this experience?
So at a very high level, I learned that that it's possible to have a career in creative arts, that there are tons of people employed in the areas that I first thought, I wonder, like, how do people get those jobs? Like, it would be so cool to work in that, in that industry or in that company or with that music artist. But now here I am, I'm seeing, wow, like payments are going out to, at the time, one of the artists was Little Bow Wow. And so like payments need to go out to his tutor because they're traveling with him on tour, or Destiny's Child's video is over budget. And so now it needs to get approved. Or there's this production in Kansas that wants to use a song. So they're asking for permission, right? And so I started seeing like, wow, there's a whole industry behind this. And so that was really illuminating for me. The other thing is that I learned about myself is that, that I really want this. And so I'm willing to, like I remember when I lived in New York, I was living in a kind of a roach infested apartment, and it wasn't even my place. I was basically renting out a bedroom from another family, right? Just to kind of get myself into New York. And so I just realized that about myself, like, wow, I'm willing to go to lengths to kind of go after something that I feel like I have to, or I owe it to myself, or now that I see the glimpse, like now that I've caught the bug, like I have to do this. So I learned that about myself. And then the last thing I learned, and I learned many times over again, is that a lot of, especially in the creative arts maybe, or in the creative business, a lot of it is personality, and it's about social skills, and it's about it's not just about put your head down and do your work. I mean, you're going to be appreciated if you do that, but there's a lot to be said in the creative business about making an impression, taking the time to kind of have an engagement with your fellow coworkers or your boss or other senior leaders. And at first, you may start to think like I would have been, I probably was like early on, like, wow, look at him. He never works. Or all she does is, walk around with her coffee and talk to all the executives. And here I am doing all the, paperwork. But I recognize that that's important. I recognize that that's an important part of it. It puts you in a position where you're heard and you're relied upon. It's not just about, oh, they just kind of, charm their way into their career. Yeah, some of it is charming, is about charming people, but it is about just putting yourself in a situation where that if there's an opportunity that someone looks to you and say, hey, Matt, is this something that you'd be interested in? Because you have a rapport with them. So those are probably the big things that I learned early on, especially coming from a more traditional academic. You study, you get a score on your test, and then you get a license, and then you become a teacher, right? It was a big fundamental shift for me, having worked at Sony Music. So that was really big for me, or pivotal for me.
So Matt, what comes after Sony? Okay,
so I will give you guys the truncated version. So after Sony, I kind of knew, like, okay, this is something that I really want to do. I'm moving to LA. Of course, when I remember even in high school, 5-6 years prior to this point, I was like, wow, can you imagine if I ever moved to LA and try to work in the entertainment business? But by the point of 2 years at Sony Music and in New York, I was like, I'm moving to LA, I could do it. And so I moved to LA, kind of had to start over and knock on doors, because now I'm moving from music to TV and film, which is also a passion of mine. I always just thought that music was less competitive. Again, also that's the other side of me that's trying to architect my way into where I want to go. But I was just equally passionate about TV and film, storytelling, arts. And so I moved to LA. Then I ended up, working as an assistant again for many years, but at Showtime, ABC, and then independent films were really big at the time. And so I got into independent film marketing, and that was the time when digital and social media was starting to come into its own in terms of a business practice. Digital and social media existed before that, and then digital existed. As a student, even in elementary school, we would get computers. It's not the computers that we think about today, but it was like a computer, and you can do like 2 games on it. But that was still fascinating to me, and it was always a reward for like the kids who got their work done, or the smart kids. And so I had an early affinity, even like the recordings that I did with the mock interviews. I had an early affinity for digital or technology or things of that sort. And so once I was in a position, it developed basically a marketing career, creative marketing career, and digital and social media started coming up. They looked to me as the young kid at the time, hey, you know about digital and social media, you know about blogging. What do you think about this? Or what would be a cool idea for this? And so that's how I fell into digital and social media marketing. So I did that for independent films, and I moved out here and did that for Discovery Channel and TLC. And then social media took off, like YouTube, social media, Facebook, all that stuff just took off. And so then I was on a kind of a fast track to all of a sudden being, kind of relied upon and called upon and pulled into meetings, because at the time everyone was like, we have to leverage social media. I mean, it's still an important part of it now, but it's just one element of many things. But back then it was like, that's the secret sauce. That's the lightning in the bottle. We need to do social media. Whatever, it's like, we need to sell a product. We need to be on social media. We need to promote this brand new TV show. It needs to be on social media. Social media was just the answer to everything. And so I was fortunate enough to kind of be in that spot where all of a sudden I was relied upon as the kind of expert. And the great thing is that, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but at the time there was also a lot of people. This is I'm talking now about 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. There was a lot of folks that were coming into the scene as social media experts, because they know social media, and you have all these executives that are like, we need someone who knows how to do Facebook. We need someone who knows how to do YouTube. And then you have kids that are graduating saying, well, I know Facebook, I know YouTube. And so all of a sudden they're all social media experts. But I was fortunate enough that, I did have experience beyond digital and social media, even though that was also my passion. But I came in from a general marketing, where we had to think about print advertising and PR and things of that sort. And so as digital kind of brought all of that stuff together into kind of an intersection, for me, I was just very fortunate that I already had that bigger view of it. So rather than me just coming in saying, you need to do Facebook, which again, anyone could do, anyone could come in and say, I'm an expert, we need to do Facebook. I really came in as, well, so how's this going to be connected to like that marketing campaign that you're going to do? Or how's this going to be connected to the PR that you're trying to tell about this story? The story that you're trying to tell about this product or this film or this, like, what are you trying to do there? And then let me try to help replicate it or amplify it or accentuate it through social media. And so I came in from that angle, which really just put me in a better spot to be more effective, as well as just more inclusive and collaborative, but hopefully also more more effective, because at the end of the day, social media is part of storytelling. It is part of marketing. It is part of PR. It's not like it's a separate thing. It's changed a lot. It's changed everything, and it's made all the traditional PR and advertising and marketing folks be like, wow, like this is a whole new playing field. In the same way that Bitcoin is all of a sudden changing the whole financial industry. Yeah, social media and digital totally made all these folks that maybe have degrees and awards in PR all of a sudden feel like, wait, I don't know how to do PR anymore in the digital age. And so I don't want to I don't want to downplay the importance and the effects and the monumental effects that digital and social media had on this landscape. But at the end of the day, it's still a form of storytelling, which is as old as time. And because I already came in from that angle, it's not like, and it's also not like I said, oh, I'm going to go into digital marketing because that's the thing to do. So I'm going to go and buy a computer and start studying it. I already So I was just really fortunate to have all of those things coming together for me, to put me in a place where I can then develop a career specifically focused on digital, as a way in to think about marketing and communications, and bringing that very creative and storytelling element to it, as opposed to saying, hey, yeah, he does Facebook because that's all he does. He does Facebook and he does Facebook advertising. That's all he does. Let's hire him. Or he does SEO. That's all he does. Let's hire him. I definitely came at it from a more broader perspective, which helped me in all of my positions, as well as now doing what I do now, which is like thinking about businesses and opportunities as a whole, and then kind of working my way into it from a digital standpoint.
I love the fact that your story begins, at least the creative part begins in first grade, second grade, with you making media social. You engage with content to reimagine how it can be used and to share that with friends, and that the things that you do, whether that is video games and in terms of exploring worlds and competing, etc., or the Legos, the things that you're building from your imagination versus kind of ready, set designs, all the way through deciding what you're going to study in college and why you're going to study it, and its use and its application in real life. And then even finagling ways to take time while you're pursuing a master's to also pursue a passion that you see as relevant, that then actually becomes your true career trajectory to prepare you for where. So like this, the idea of the way you tell the story makes it clear that there are all these building blocks all along the way, including encouragement from adults. Even if it was encouragement to do something different than what you wanted to do, it was still encouragement. And that you had this faith community that you were a part of that also provided a kind of, you called it sheltering, but I would also describe that as a kind of cocoon for you to be able to develop and to grow into who it is that you were going to be. And so now you run your own company that is an extension of all those experiences. So let's talk about what it is that 1222 does that maybe is a little bit more nuanced than what you just said around narrative. What does your company do?
Sure. So we are a content, at the end of the day, we are content creators at the end of the day. But it is through the lens of marketing and communications services. So a lot of times, especially if you look at like, solicitations where people are saying, we need this, we need that. People are still, think of it as we need a marketer, we need an advertiser, we need a PR person. Sometimes they'll say digital, and then when you look at digital, you can immediately tell if they're looking for a digital person, as in like, we need somebody who's going to go into the website and make updates and do social media, or is it digital, like thinking about everything from a digital lens? And we do both. And so, a lot of times when I was in roles, it was always trying to figure out what exactly was needed. But now I'm in a position where it's like, well, let me know what you think you need. Let me understand a little bit more about where your business or what your organization or what your objectives are. And then I can also kind of give you additional things to think about. And then whether it's at the tactical level of you could really do something really interesting here on Instagram, or it's more at a strategic level where it's, let's go back and think about your audiences. Why are you only reaching out to that audience? Because you do have an opportunity to reach out with this hard to reach audience through social media and digital, because it's a lot more efficient that way. Whereas back in the day, it's like, oh, we can't even reach this. Let's just try to reach everyone with a huge billboard and spend all our money there. And then hopefully that will reach those, that small segment, right? But at least that we're covering huge bases. That was the way that, it was like casting a big net, But now you can be a lot more precise with your marketing and your tactics and your content, one version for this audience, one version for that audience. And so I'm just now in a position where I can offer that full gamut of strategic thinking in terms of how to achieve your mission, your goals, your objectives, with thinking about all the digital opportunities, or more tactical. Hey, I just need a graphic. I need an infographic. I need some social media help. I need some social media training, or I need a new website. So that's like more of just kind of the tactical aspect. So we kind of provide the full gamut of all of that. A lot of times I do often because I can't myself. A lot of times it's me staying up late at night working on these things, but sometimes I need to pull in somebody who's like way better than me in illustration. Somebody who's good. Like we really want our own unique character for this campaign. It would take me forever to sit here and draw, and I would keep drawing, and I don't like it. But I can hire an illustrator who's looking for opportunities as a freelancer, or maybe they just got out of college, or they're taking on some additional projects. That this is what they do. They create illustrations. They digitally or in a style that's more traditional or a mixed medium of it. And so I learned by partnering with them and collaborating with them, and my skills grow in that world of animation. Like right now, I'm really big into video animation. So the way that 1222 works is that I really try to build a tribe of creative, independent creative practitioners, and hopefully that if they're not savvy with the whole marketing and communication world of it, then that's where I come in. But if they are savvy in it, great. Then I know they got it, and I can focus on something else. So everything from website, social media, content, graphic design, short video, influencer programs, remarketing, paid social media, paid LinkedIn, paid Facebook, paid Instagram, advertising, placing those ads, thinking about that. We run the gamut, and I only pause before I say that because I don't want to sound like, I know a lot of times sometimes people, it's like the fake it till you make it kind of approach. It's like, yeah, we do it all. And so I really, because reputation is also very important to me, I really am thoughtful about saying things like that, where it sounds like I'm saying, oh, I do it all. Because I don't. I do it. I cover it all by pulling in the right people, and I'm knowledgeable and have a proficiency for all that allows me to kind of pull in the right people and architect it in the right way. Because for a while, it's much better now, but for a while, the digital, as the digital stuff was just changing the landscape, there were, the problem was that people didn't know what to even ask for. And so, there was a lot of just people falling over each other, being clumsy, and we need a website. Well, do you really need a website? We need we need to be on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. We need to be tweeting every single day. Really? Do you really need that? So there's a lot of that kind of negotiation that was needed, or people are kind of being clumsy about. But now, again, that's kind of where 1222 again allows you, or one of our promises is that we're going to look at what you need, and we're going to really help develop a custom plan for you. It's not like, oh, we do SEO, so if you come to us, then I'm going to force SEO into a solution for you. Or we do video content, and so then if you come into us, I'm going to say, it needs to be all video. Let me show you all the statistics about video being the most important thing. Yeah, all true, but that entity has an ulterior motive, or has self-interest in saying that video is the answer, right? And so just given the perspective that I have, I can come in and really kind of think about what you really need, and then help pull in the right people to kind of execute.
Curious, what's the significance of the name 1222?
Okay, so 1222, so that was my address in LA. It was my address. I was at 1222 Olive Drive. And the reason why that became kind of significant to me is because I had a good friend who was also kind of like a creative kindred spirit, so to speak. And he had the mindset that the number 22 always followed him around. Like whenever he sees 22, like, oh, that means I have to go there. Or, oh, that means that this is the job for me. Because when I went to interview, they had a 22 on the building. And I kept saying, that's statistically what's happening is that you're just seeing a bunch of numbers in the world all the time. And because you have it in your head that's 22, that you're like, oh, it's 22. And it's just kind of ringing in your head. In the same way that, I'm sure everyone experiences where they're like, every time I look at the clock, it's always 11:16. It's like, well, somehow you got that in your head. So every time you look at the clock, when it's not 11:16, you don't even think about it. But when it's 11:16, you're like, there it is again. It's speaking to me, right? And so in many ways, that's essentially what marketing and communication is. You're really trying to frame something in a way that's going to make it memorable. And so, and the other thing is because my address was 1222, my buddy was like, okay, yeah, we'll be roommates and we'll work on this together. Because he's like, 22, this is what I'm meant to be. And so that's really when kind of this took off in terms of just learning all the different, learning Photoshop, learning video, because he had a lot of skills and we were just kind of teaching each other, so to speak. And so when it came time to kind of start my own business, I was just thinking about the last time that I really felt like it was all coming together. And so that's where the idea of 22, even though I don't believe in the whole 22 aspect of it, but I do believe in the power of framing things and suggesting things. And I do believe in storytelling. And so, and it really was a kind of the origin story of all of this for me in many ways. And so, yeah, I'm just honoring that kind of that tradition or that origin aspect of it.
Makes a lot of sense. It seems like you're still also applying that psychology to
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up, because we've got a couple of minutes left, I wonder if it's funny, you said earlier in this conversation that if you could go back and talk to your younger self, you'd probably be like, who are you? Why are you talking to me? But if you could go back and give your younger self any advice,
right?
What do you think you would tell your younger self?
On a high level, not specifically thinking about just life advice, the thing that I would really want to tell myself is that it sounds a little cliche, but it's so true. This idea that you have to push yourself out of your comfort zone. You just have to. There are so many things that we don't do, whether it's asking someone out on a date or going for that the last piece of pie or entering a contest. There's so many things that we don't do because we talk ourselves out of it. There are people who are blessed without that, that they just go for things and that's great. But I get the sense that so many of us talk ourselves out of things, right? And so my biggest advice would be that the worst that could happen is so insignificant compared to the gains that you could have. Even if you fail, that is a huge gain in terms of experience and in terms of learnings. And so that would be the big message that I would say, just not be afraid and really just try to make sure that I communicate that, because, again, don't be afraid, go after things in life. That just sounds very cliche, but I really want them to know that everything that you think about of why you shouldn't do something or you shouldn't go after that or you're not good enough, know that those are just lies, not lies. Those are just self-doubt that it's not reality. It's only reality that it's self-doubt that you're putting limits on yourself, and that you really want to push yourself out of that and give your chance to prove yourself wrong, surprise yourself. So that would be the big lesson. From a creative standpoint or a career standpoint, yeah, it goes back to the idea that there's going to be a lot of expectations. You're going to feel like you need to do something, or go after something, make money. And I'm definitely in the school of thought where it's like, you want to keep moving. You want to be driving. You want to be trying things out to kind of find your way into the lane that's going to move, right? You don't want to be the person that's like, well, I'm just going to sit here and really think about what I want to do and then go. No, you want to be active, but you give yourself that freedom. Give yourself that freedom to explore and play and figure out what it is that is going to unlock a drive and talent in you. Because again, it goes back to the self-doubt, because you just don't realize when you're young that your worldview or your understanding of life is just so small, and you really can't base everything on what you think, what you know. You have to be smart enough to know that you don't know everything. And so you have to be willing to push yourself out of it. And so even from a creative standpoint, it's like, yeah, you might actually be amazing at video art, or you may be actually, yeah, sure, maybe you can be a video game creator. Don't talk yourself out of those things yet. Be smart, be active, and put in the work, but make sure you give yourself that freedom to kind of think big.
That's great advice. For your younger self, for anyone that needs it now. So, Matt, I want to thank you for joining me for this last hour. This has been really impactful, and I look forward to finding ways to work with 1222 in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for taking this time. Let me go ahead and wrap this up just by saying thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Feel free to share this video with someone that you feel like needs these words of encouragement, this guidance. Check out Matt at 1222 to learn more about the work that his company does. And I heard him talk about internships. So if you're a college student looking for an internship, 1222 sounds like a great place to work. With that said, let me just end this with a commercial. Peace, y'all.
To the SP 1200, the blue light bulb, to the board, the engineer's hands, and the limited well of patience. Hallelujah to everybody say ho, amen to all the ladies say ow. Thank God for make money, money, make money, money, and bless every hand that was ever put in the air. In your name, we pray.